Hello everybody, it's Tarun. Welcome to your 15th tutorial in the CSS for presentation course. In this tutorial, I'll move within the last topics of the unit thinking inside the box. Okay, and we'll talk about margins mostly here. So now let's start with margins. The last remaining component of the element box is its margin, which is an optional amount of space that you can add on the outside of the border. Margins keep elements from bumping into one another or the edge of the browser window. You can even use margins to make space for another column of content, okay, which we'll see how that works in the unit page layout with CSS. Okay, in this way, margins are an important tool in CSS based page layout. The site specific and shorthand margin properties work much like the padding properties we have looked already. However, margins have some special behaviors to be aware of. So first of all, I'll show you the values of margin, different margin properties and the shorthand margin property. Okay, for the different margin properties, the properties are margin top, margin right, margin bottom and margin left. The values are length measurement, percentage, auto and inherit. The default value is auto and it can be applied to all elements. The values are similar for margin shorthand property, okay, and the default value is auto, and it is applied to all the elements except elements with table display types other than table caption, table and inline table. Okay, the margin properties are very straightforward to use. You can either specify an amount of margin to appear on each side of the element or use the margin property to specify all sides at once. The shorthand margin property works the same as the padding shorthand. When you supply 4 values, they are applied in clockwise order, which is top, right, bottom and left to the sides of the element. If you supply 3 values, the middle value applies to both left and right sides. When 2 values are provided, the first is used for top and bottom and the second applies to left and right edges. Okay. Finally, 1 value will be applied to all the 4 sides of the element. As for the most web measurements, EMS, pixels and percentages are the most common ways to specify margins. But be aware, however, if you specify a percentage value, the percentage value is calculated based on the width of the parent element. If the parent's width changes, so will the margins on all the 4 sides of the child element will change. The auto keyword allows the browser to fill in the amount of margin necessary to fit or fill the available space. So I'll just show you one figure which shows the result of the different margin examples. Okay, note that I have added a light dotted rule to indicate the outside edge of the margin for clarity purposes. Okay, but they would not appear on a real web page. So here you can see 3 examples. The first one here I have given a margin of 4 EM. Okay, and you can see the margin by dotted line, but in the real web page it will not appear. I have just shown it to make you understand the concept better. In the next example, I have in the first example, before moving to the next, I'll just want to say that in the first example I have used the shorthand margin property and I've defined only 4 EM, which is applied to all the 4 sides. In the second example here, okay, I have applied the different properties for each side. I have given margin top 2 EM, then margin right 250 pixel, then margin bottom 1 EM, and then margin left 4 EM. Okay, and in the third example here in the body, I have given a margin of 0 and then 15%. Okay, the 0 will be applied to the top and bottom as you can see here, and 15% to the left and right. Okay. So now let's see something about margin behavior. Although it is easy to write rules that apply margin amounts around HTML elements, it is important to be familiar with some of the margin behavior. The first one is collapsing margins. The most significant margin behavior is to be aware of that the top and bottom margins of neighboring elements collapse. This means that instead of accumulating, adjacent margins overlap and the only largest value will be used. Using the 2 paragraphs from the last figure which I showed you, if the top element has a bottom margin of 4 EMs and the following element has a top margin of 2 EMs, okay, then the resulting margin space element does not add up to 6 EMs. Okay, rather the margin collapses and resulting margin between the paragraphs will be 4 EMs only, which is the largest specified value. The only top and bottom margins don't collapse is for floated or absolutely positioned elements, which we'll get to in the next unit. Margins on the left and right sides never collapse, and they are nice and predictable. Okay, so now let's talk about margins on inline elements. You can apply top and bottom margins to inline text elements, but it will not work. But it will not add vertical space above and below the element, and the height of the element or line will not change. However, when you apply left and right margins to inline text elements, margin space will be held clear before and after the text in the flow of the element, even if that element breaks over several lines. Okay, just to keep things interesting, margins on replaced elements such as images do render on all sides and therefore do affect the height of the line. Okay, so now let's see the negative margins. It is worth noting that it is possible to specify negative values for margins. When you apply a negative margin, the content, padding and border are moved in the opposite direction that would have resulted from a positive margin value. This should be made clear with one figure which I will show you, which I'll just explain it then only. Let me just show you the figure. Okay, this figure shows two neighboring paragraphs with different color borders applied to show their boundaries. In the left view, I have added a 4 EM bottom margin to the top paragraph, and it has effect of pushing the following paragraph down by that amount. If I specify a negative minus 4 EM, the following element moves up by that amount and overlaps the element with the negative margin, as you can see in the right side of this figure. This may seem like a strange thing to do, and in fact you probably would not make blocks of text overlap as shown. The point here is that you can use margins with both positive and negative values to move elements around on the page. This is the basis of many CSS layout techniques. Okay, so now let's see the last topic in this unit, which is adding drop shadows to boxes. Okay, in the unit formatting text, you learned about the text shadow property, which adds a drop shadow to text. Now the box shadow property. Okay, box shadow, which is new in CSS3, applies a drop shadow around the entire visible element box, so which excludes the margin. Okay, so I'll just show you the values for this property first. The values are horizontal offset, vertical offset, blur distance, spread distance, color, and then inset. Okay, the value of the box shadow property should seem familiar after working with text shadow. Okay, which specifies the horizontal and vertical offset distances, the amount the shadow should blur, and a color. For box shadows, you can also specify a spread amount, which increases or you can say decreases with negative values the size of the shadow. By default, the shadow color is the same as the foreground color of the element, but specifying a color overrides it. So I'll just show you one figure and I'll explain it there only. This figure shows the results of the some code examples, which I'll show you after this figure. Okay, the first example here adds a simple box shadow of 6 pixels. I've defined 6 pixels to the right and 6 pixels down without blur or spread. The second adds a blur value of 5 pixels, and the third here shows the effect of a 10 pixel spread value. Box shadows are always applied to the area outside the border of the element. Okay, If the element has a transparent or translucent background, you will not see the box shadow in the area behind the element. So now I'll show you the code for this three boxes I have shown you. These are the three codes for their three boxes. Okay, as I told you, the first one I've defined only 6 pixel width, 6 pixel to the right and to the left. Okay, not to the left, to the down, and without blur or spread. In the second one I've added 5 pixel blur, and in the third one I've added 10 pixel spread. Okay, you can make the shadow render inside the edges of the visible element by adding the inset keyword to the rule. Okay, you just use inset here, then define the values. Okay, which will make like that the element is pressed into the screen. As for text shadow, you can specify multiple box shadows on an element by providing the values in a comma separated list. The values that come first get placed on top, and the subsequent shadows are placed behind it in order in which they appear in the list. The box shadow property is supported by all current version browsers, with the exception of Opera Mini for mobile, to accommodate recent WebKit browsers, which are Safari and Mobile Safari, Chrome and Android, and older versions of Firefox. Okay, it is recommended that you include the vendor prefix properties as I showed you in the example. Internet Explorer 9 and higher support the standard property, but Internet Explorer 6 through it do not support it at all. My opinion is that it isn't the end of the world if users of those old browsers don't see a nifty little drop shadow. If you must have shadows in old Internet Explorer versions, you will need to use the property Internet Explorer filter property. Okay, as you can go ahead and look it on the web. So this was all from my side in this tutorial and in the unit thinking inside the box. In the next tutorial, I'll start with the next unit, okay, which is floating and positioning. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next tutorial.